Professor Kelthane Vortok adjusted his prismatic teaching collar with all four of his perfectly evolved hands, savoring the moment before his most popular lecture. The Galactic University's largest auditorium buzzed with anticipation as representatives from 237 species settled into their bio-adaptive seating pods. Today's topic, primitive Deathworld biology, how humans somehow didn't go extinct. Kelthane's crystalline eyes gleamed with academic superiority as he activated the holographic display. His reputation as the galaxy's foremost expert on comparative biomechanics hadn't been built on false modesty, after all. The Krillian professor's exoskeleton practically hummed with self-satisfaction. "Welcome, fellow scholars, to another fascinating study in evolutionary accidents," Kelthane announced, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for discussing laboratory specimens. "Today we examine perhaps the most perplexing biological mystery in known space. How did humans, with their laughably fragile bone structure and pathetic muscle density, manage to survive on a Class 12 Deathworld?" The auditorium erupted in the polite chittering, buzzing, and harmonic resonance that passed for academic laughter among the assembled species. A Voltarian student in the third row actually shed a few scales in amusement. "Consider this," Kelthane continued, warming to his favorite subject. "Humans possess no natural armor, no venomous defense systems, no enhanced sensory organs. Their bones are hollow calcium deposits that snap under moderate pressure. Their muscles are stringy protein fibers that tear if overextended. By all logical analysis, they should have been extinct within their first planetary cycle." More amused sounds rippled through the crowd. Near the back, a figure in simple Earth clothing looked up from what appeared to be was she filing her nails? Yet somehow Kelthane pressed on, completely absorbed in his own brilliance. These glass creatures stumbled their way off their hostile rock and into galactic civilization. Truly, the universe has a sense of humor. The human in the back row, one Zara McKnight according to the enrollment records, didn't seem particularly offended by the description. She simply continued her manicure with the casual indifference of someone who had heard it all before. "Now then," Kelthane announced, his academic smugness reaching peak levels, "who can tell me why human physiology is considered the weakest documented in our databases?" Tentacles, claws, and various appendages shot up across the auditorium. The professor's day was going exactly as planned. If only he knew what was coming next. Kelthane's four eyes swept across the eager faces before settling on the lone human in the back row. Perfect. Nothing quite drove home a lecture like a live specimen. "Ah, Miss McKnight," he called out with the kind of patronizing warmth typically reserved for small children and house pets. "How fortuitous to have an actual human present for today's demonstration." Zara looked up from her nail file, one eyebrow raised in mild curiosity. "Oh, good. I was wondering when I'd become the class guinea pig." The professor's mandibles clicked in what passed for Krillian amusement. "Indeed. Please remain seated. No need to strain yourself walking down here." A few snickers echoed through the auditorium at the implied weakness. "Now, class," Kelthane continued, his chest plates puffing with academic pride, "observe the stark contrast between evolved physiology and primitive adaptation." He rapped his knuckles against his own forearm, producing a metallic ring that resonated through the hall's acoustic systems. Krillian bone structure consists of biometallic compounds reinforced with crystalline matrices. Density rating 9.7 on the Galactic Standard Scale. He gestured towards Zara with obvious pity. Human bones, by comparison, are essentially compressed chalk. Density rating, a tragic 2.1. Their entire skeletal system could be shattered by what we would consider gentle pressure. "Fascinating," Zara deadpanned, not looking up from examining her freshly filed nails. "Do you have a point, or are we just here for the anatomy lecture?" Kelthane's academic enthusiasm bubbled over. "Excellent question. Class, I propose a simple demonstration. A basic handshake between species. I shall apply precisely controlled pressure, naturally keeping well within human tolerances to avoid any unfortunate accidents." The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. This was exactly the kind of practical demonstration that made Professor Vortak's lectures legendary across the university. "Miss McKnight," Kelthane announced grandly, "would you be so kind as to participate in this educational exercise? I promise to be extraordinarily gentle. We wouldn't want to damage Earth's investment in your education." More laughter rippled through the crowd. A Thessian student in the front row actually recorded the moment on his biocam for later study. Zara set down her nail file and stretched her arms above her head with a casual yawn. "Sure thing, Prof. But maybe you should stretch first. Don't want to pull something important." The entire auditorium erupted in delighted chittering, clicking, and harmonized amusement. The human's adorable concern for the professor's well-being was simply precious. Here was a fragile little creature worried about a being whose exoskeleton could withstand plasma fire. "How thoughtful," Kelthane replied, practically glowing with condescending warmth. "But I assure you my physiology is quite robust." He began making his way toward the back row, 4 hands flexing with hydraulic precision. This would be the perfect capstone to his lecture series. What could possibly go wrong? Professor Kelthane Vortak ascended the auditorium steps with the confident stride of someone who had never questioned his place in the universal food chain. His biometallic exoskeleton caught the ambient lighting perfectly, each plate shifting with mechanical precision as his hydraulic muscle systems powered his movement. 2 centuries of Krillian evolution had crafted him into a living tank, and he knew it. "Now, class," he announced, pausing dramatically at Zara's row, "observe the fundamental differences in our physiological construction." He held up his primary right hand, flexing each of the 4 segmented fingers. Krillian appendages operate on pressurized fluid systems capable of generating over 4,000 pounds of grip strength per square inch. Our bone analogs are reinforced with titanium deposits naturally occurring in our homeworld's atmosphere. The assembled students leaned forward in fascination. Even the usually bored Voltarians seemed engaged. Kelthane continued his impromptu anatomy lesson with obvious relish. "My skeletal framework could withstand direct impact from a Class 3 mining laser. The hydraulic networks running through my muscular systems allow for precise pressure control down to fractions of standard units." He chuckled. "A sound like grinding gears, perfect for delicate work with fragile specimens." Zara had pulled out her phone and was now scrolling through what appeared to be social media updates. She didn't even glance up as the professor positioned himself beside her seat. "Miss McKnight," Kelthane said with exaggerated patience, "if you would be so kind." Zara mumbled, still focused on her screen. Without looking, she casually extended her right hand toward the professor while typing a response to someone with her left thumb. Kelthane's academic pride swelled. This was perfect. The human couldn't even be bothered to pay attention to what was supposed to be a significant interspecies moment. Her complete lack of concern would make the lesson even more impactful. "Excellent," he announced to the class. "Note the human's casual disregard for potential danger. This is typical of their species' poor risk assessment capabilities." He positioned his hand carefully above hers. "I shall now demonstrate the vast gulf between our respective physical capabilities using minimal pressure. Perhaps 0.1% of my maximum grip strength." The auditorium fell silent with anticipation. Biocams whirred softly as students recorded the historic moment. Kelthane's 4 fingers closed around Zara's smaller human hand with scientific precision. His internal pressure regulators engaged, carefully modulating the hydraulic flow to ensure he applied only the gentlest possible squeeze. He had calculated everything perfectly. The pressure differential would be just enough to prove his point without actually harming the fragile human. For exactly 2.3 seconds, everything went according to plan. Then physics remembered who was really in charge. The sound that filled the auditorium wasn't the gentle demonstration of superior Krillian engineering that Kelthane had anticipated. Instead, a sharp, wet crack echoed through the chamber like a gunshot in a library. Then another. Then a third, smaller pop that somehow managed to be even more disturbing than the first 2. Kelthane's internal pressure systems screamed warnings as his biometallic radius and ulna, those supposedly indestructible pillars of evolutionary superiority, snapped like dry kindling in a forest fire. The hydraulic fluid that powered his grip strength began leaking from ruptured conduits, painting abstract patterns on the floor in luminescent blue. The professor's agonized shriek started somewhere in the subsonic range and climbed steadily upward until it reached frequencies that made the Thescian's audio receptors automatically shut down in self-defense. It was the sound of 200 years of academic arrogance being compressed into a single moment of pure, undiluted reality. Zara glanced up from her phone for the first time since the demonstration began. "Oh," she said with mild concern, as if noticing a slightly overcast sky. "That didn't sound good." Kelthane stared at his mangled appendage in complete shock. The titanium-reinforced bones that had once been his pride were now bent at angles that would have impressed an abstract sculptor. Hydraulic fluid dripped steadily onto his lecture notes. The entire auditorium sat in stunned silence, 237 different species trying to process what they had just witnessed. Somewhere in the back of his pain-addled consciousness, Kelthane began to suspect his lecture notes might need some revision. Kelthane's consciousness fragmented into 3 distinct streams of thought, each more horrifying than the last. The first stream was pure sensation, white-hot agony radiating from his shattered appendage up through his neural networks, triggering emergency shutdown protocols in his pain management systems. The second stream was clinical analysis. His bioscanners were screaming impossible readings, diagnostic systems crashing as they tried to process data that violated every known law of comparative biology. The third stream was existential terror, the slow, creeping realization that everything he knew about the universe was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. His internal medical systems kicked into overdrive, flooding his circulatory networks with emergency analgesics and structural repair nanites. But even through the chemical fog of pain suppressants, one thought echoed with crystal clarity: how? How had a creature with a documented grip strength of 67 pounds per square inch just crushed bones rated to withstand 4,000? The diagnostic readouts hovering in his peripheral vision made no sense. According to his bioscanners, the human's grip strength was the number kept fluctuating. 100,000 pounds per square inch. No, wait, 200,000. The scanners reset, recalibrated, and tried again. Error. 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 Oops, Zara said, finally looking up from her phone with the kind of mild embarrassment typically reserved for stepping on someone's toe. Should have mentioned I rock climb on weekends. Rock climbing. Weekends. Kelthane's academic mind tried to process this information through the haze of shock and pharmaceutical intervention. She was discussing recreational activities while his supposedly superior physiology lay in ruins around her fingers. Also, she added conversationally, "I've been meaning to ask about the gravity settings in here. Are we running at galactic standard? Because that's like what? 0.32 Earth normal? That's adorable. 0.32 Earth normal." The professor's world tilted on its axis. If galactic standard gravity was less than 1/3 of what this creature was accustomed to, then her natural strength was being artificially suppressed by environmental factors. Which meant the auditorium erupted into chaos. A Voltairean student in the third row simply toppled over, his scales losing all cohesion as his consciousness fled. 2 Thescians began hyperventilating in harmonized panic, their respiratory systems struggling to process the cognitive dissonance. A group of Melanite exchange students activated their emergency beacon and began transmitting distress signals to their homeworld. Medical emergency in Lecture Hall 17, an automated system announced with bureaucratic calm, deploying emergency response teams. Please remain calm and evacuate in an orderly fashion. Calm. Orderly. Kelthane would have laughed if his vocal cords weren't busy processing screams. Through the chaos, he watched Zara gently release his hand, and the absence of pressure sent fresh waves of agony through his nervous system. "Sorry about that, Prof," she said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "I should have warned you. We learned in orientation that most galactic species are, well, Let's just say you guys are built for different environments. Built for different environments. The understatement of the millennium. Kelthane's research-oriented mind began cataloging the implications even as his body systems fought to maintain consciousness. If humans evolved in 3 times standard gravity, if their recreational activities included activities that would be considered extreme sports by galactic standards, if their documented physical capabilities were measured while operating under massive environmental handicaps. Dear cosmic forces above and below, what were humans actually capable of? Emergency medical technicians burst through the auditorium doors, their anti-grav stretchers and trauma kits ready for action. They took one look at Kelthane's mangled appendage and immediately began arguing about proper containment protocols. Biometallic fracture, Class 7, one of them announced, requires immediate regeneration chamber treatment. How did this happen? Demanded another, scanning the area for signs of industrial accidents or weapons discharge. Handshake, Zara said helpfully. The medical team stopped arguing and stared at her. Then at Kelthane. Then at the steadily growing pool of hydraulic fluid on the floor. Handshake, the lead technician repeated slowly, as if the word might make more sense if pronounced correctly. Yep, Zara confirmed. I think I squeezed a little too hard. My bad. Kelthane's academic worldview, carefully constructed over decades of research and publication, began crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Every paper he had written, every lecture he had given, every condescending comment about human fragility, all of it based on the fundamentally flawed assumption that what they were seeing was the extent of human capability. But what if it wasn't? What if humans weren't weak creatures who had somehow survived despite their limitations? What if they were apex predators who had learned to restrain themselves to avoid accidentally destroying everything around them? The thought was so terrifying that Kelthane's consciousness finally took pity on him and shut down entirely. The last thing he heard before the darkness claimed him was Zara asking, "Is he going to be okay?" "Because I've got comparative literature next period, and Professor Hendricks gets really cranky when we're late." The emergency medical team swarmed around Professor Kelthane's unconscious form with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had seen every conceivable type of academic accident. Except, apparently, this one, compound biometallic fracture with hydraulic system rupture, announced Chief Medical Officer this as her scanner painted holographic overlays across the professor's mangled appendage. Pressure damage consistent with industrial compression equipment. What kind of machinery was involved in this incident? No machinery, Zara said, holding up her hand and wiggling her fingers. Just these bad boys. The medical team exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their collective confusion. This ran her scanner over Zara's hand, and her expression shifted from professional concern to academic fascination to something approaching existential dread. "Impossible," she muttered, checking her readings again. "These sensors are detecting bone density readings of this can't be right." 4.7 on the Galactic Standard Scale? "Sounds about right," Zara said with a shrug. "Though I'm probably on the lower end. My little sister does competitive powerlifting." The remaining conscious students pressed closer, their earlier amusement replaced by morbid curiosity. A brave Melanite in the front row raised a tentative pseudopod. "Miss McKnight," he squeaked, "could you perhaps explain the physiological parameters of your homeworld?" Zara settled back in her seat, apparently happy to play teacher while the medical team worked on extracting Kelthane from the wreckage of his own arrogance. "Well," she began conversationally, "Earth's gravity is about 3 times what you guys consider standard. It has been for, 4.5 billion years or so. Everything that survived had to adapt accordingly. 3 times standard gravity." The number rippled through the auditorium like a physical wave. Students began frantically calculating the implications on their personal devices. "So when I shake hands with someone," Zara continued, "I have to consciously remember that what feels like a gentle squeeze to me is basically the equivalent of being crushed by heavy machinery for you folks." She gestured toward the medical team, who were now sedating Kelthane for emergency surgery. "Poor Professor Vortok there asked me to shake hands," And I forgot to dial it back to galactic safe levels. The Melanite student's chromatophores flickered with nervous energy. But surely your species developed some evolutionary safeguards? Internal limiters to prevent accidental destruction of your environment? Oh, we did, Zara said brightly. It's called self-control. We learn it as kids. Don't squeeze the cat too hard. Don't slam doors. Don't accidentally punch holes in walls when you're frustrated. The auditorium fell silent as the implications sank in. Humans weren't just strong. They were walking weapons who had learned to constantly restrain themselves to avoid destroying everything around them. A Voltarian student near the back raised a shaking claw. Your homeworld, what other conditions did your species adapt to? Zara's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely got to talk about home. Oh, where do I start? Constant tectonic activity, so we developed enhanced balance and spatial awareness. Atmospheric composition that would be toxic to most galactic species. So our respiratory systems can filter pretty much anything. Weather patterns that shift from life-supporting to apocalyptic without warning, so we learn to adapt quickly to changing conditions. She counted off on her fingers as she spoke, each revelation sending fresh waves of horror through her audience. Plus the wildlife. Most of our large predators could probably eat a Krillian whole. Our plant life includes species that can kill you just by being in the same room. Even our bacteria are aggressive. Oh! And the radiation exposure from our star means we develop natural resistance to energy weapons. The medical team had finished stabilizing Kelthane and were preparing to transport him to the regeneration ward. Chief Medical Officer this paused in her work to stare at Zara with something approaching religious awe. Your species, she said slowly, evolved on a planet specifically designed to kill everything living on it. Pretty much, Zara agreed cheerfully. We call it home. A Thessian student in the middle section began hyperventilating again, his harmonic frequencies climbing toward panic range. But how do you survive daily life? How do you interact with anything without destroying it? Zara's expression grew thoughtful. Same way you learn not to step on insects, I guess. Constant awareness of your impact on the environment around you. Most humans spend their entire lives operating at maybe 5% of their actual physical capability. 5%. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. The student stared at Zara with new eyes, seeing not a fragile exchange student but an apex predator in civilian clothing. A walking disaster restrained only by her own conscious choice to be gentle. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed as Professor Kelthane was rushed to emergency surgery. Dean Verix's Quellan swept into the auditorium with the kind of bureaucratic fury that could reduce tenure applications to ash. His ceremonial robes billowed behind him as he surveyed the scene, one unconscious professor being loaded onto a medical transport, 237 traumatized students, and one human casually checking her messages. What in the seven hells of Arcturus happened here? The dean demanded, his vocal cords producing the subsonic rumble that had intimidated 3 generations of faculty members. Educational demonstration, Zara said without looking up from her phone. Though I think the lesson plan might need some revision. Dean Quellan's compound eyes swiveled to focus on her with laser intensity. You human, explain. Now. Professor Vortok wanted to demonstrate the difference between human and Krillian physiology, Zara said, finally pocketing her device. Turns out his research data was a little off. A little off? The dean's voice climbed several octaves. He's being rushed to emergency surgery for what the medical team is calling catastrophic structural failure. His insurance company is already demanding an investigation. Zara winced sympathetically. Yeah, that's probably going to be awkward. Maybe next time lead with the gravity differential? Just a suggestion. The dean's attention snapped to the remaining students, who were still huddled in their seats like survivors of a natural disaster. Can someone please explain to me how a routine academic exercise resulted in a faculty member requiring emergency bone reconstruction? A Thessian student raised a trembling appendage. The human the grip strength readings were physically impossible, finished a Voltarian, scales still visibly pale from shock. Our measurement devices couldn't even calculate accurate numbers. Dean Quellan turned back to Zara with the expression of someone whose day had just taken a hard left turn into the surreal. "Miss McKnight, I'm going to need you to demonstrate exactly what happened here." "Sure thing," Zara said, standing up from her seat. "But maybe we should clear some space first? Safety and all that." The remaining students immediately scrambled to the far edges of the auditorium, leaving a wide circle around the human like she was radioactive. Which, given what they'd just learned about Earth's radiation levels, might not have been entirely inaccurate. "Now then," Dean Quellan said, maintaining what he hoped was a safe distance, "please explain your species' actual physical capabilities." "Well," Zara said, balancing effortlessly on one leg while adjusting her shoe, "let's start with basic motor control." The casual display of balance sent murmurs through the crowd. What looked like a simple human gesture required the kind of proprioceptive control that most galactic species needed cybernetic assistance to achieve. "On Earth, this is just standing normally," she continued, switching to the other leg without the slightest wobble. "Our inner ear structure evolved to compensate for seismic activity, so our balance is enhanced." "Enhanced," the dean repeated weakly. "Right." Also, Zara dropped to the floor and began doing push-ups with the casual ease of someone checking items off a grocery list. Basic fitness for humans involves exercising against 3G gravity resistance. Up, down, up, down. She maintained perfect form while carrying on a conversation, her breathing barely elevated. "This is maybe a light warm-up by Earth standards," she said at rep number 25. "My gym class in high school required a minimum of 50 for a passing grade." The auditorium watched in stunned silence as she continued her impromptu fitness demonstration. By rep 40, several students had begun taking notes. By rep 50, 2 more had fainted. "There we go," Zara said, bouncing back to her feet without any sign of exertion. "Basic human cardiovascular fitness. Nothing special." Dean Quellan's administrative composure was beginning to crack around the edges. "Nothing special. Oh, that reminds me," Zara said brightly. She pulled a standard-issue university water bottle from her bag, the kind with the supposedly tamper-proof molecular seal that required specialized equipment to open. Without breaking eye contact with the dean, she twisted the cap off with her bare fingers. The distinctive crack of breaking molecular bonds echoed through the chamber. "Want some water?" she offered helpfully. "Opening these things is always tricky when you're feeling faint." At that moment, Professor Kelthane was wheeled back into the auditorium on a medical hover gurney, his rebuilt appendage encased in a regeneration field. The painkillers had worn off enough for him to regain consciousness, and his first sight was Zara casually destroying what his species considered advanced packaging technology. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the medical equipment. "Please tell me this is a pharmaceutical hallucination." "Hey there, Prof," Zara said cheerfully, walking over to his gurney. "Feeling better?" That looked pretty painful. Kelthane's newly reconstructed hand reflexively twitched away from her approach. "Stay back, please. I need to revise my entire research methodology." "No worries," Zara said, "though you might want to update those textbooks. The chapter on human physiology is hilariously wrong." She paused thoughtfully. "Want me to open this water bottle for you, Prof?" "I promise to be extra gentle this time." The professor's response was a strangled whimper that sent the medical team rushing to check his vital signs. Dean Quellan watched this exchange with the growing realization that his university's insurance premiums were about to skyrocket. "Miss McKnight," he said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss some safety protocols for your remaining classes." "Good idea," Zara agreed. "I've got advanced materials science next week. Professor Hendricks wants us to test the tensile strength of some new alloys." She smiled innocently. "Should I mention that I might need recalibrated equipment?" The dean's expression suggested he was seriously considering early retirement. Somewhere in the back of the auditorium, a student was already updating the campus wiki with a new entry: "Humans approach with extreme caution." Professor Kelthane lay on his medical gurney, staring at the auditorium ceiling while his worldview underwent complete reconstruction. The painkillers had worn off enough for coherent thought, but not enough to dull the sharp edge of professional humiliation. 2 centuries of academic expertise, reduced to rubble by a 20-something human who treated galactic physics like a minor inconvenience. "Miss McKnight," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of its earlier condescension. "I owe you an apology." Zara looked genuinely surprised. "For what?" "You didn't know. How could you? Your research was based on humans operating in Earth-normal conditions, right?" "Exactly." Kelthane struggled to sit up, wincing as his reconstructed joints protested. "Every data point, every measurement, every conclusion I drew was based on the assumption that what we observed was your species' maximum capability." The irony was staggering. Humans weren't primitive survivors who had lucked their way off a hostile planet. They were apex predators who had learned to function in polite society without accidentally destroying everything around them. "It's like," Kelthane continued, his academic mind finally grappling with the full implications, studying a military-grade atmospheric processor and concluding it's a decorative air freshener because that's how gently it's being operated. "That's actually a pretty good analogy," Zara said approvingly. Dean Quellan cleared his throat nervously. "Professor, perhaps we should discuss revising your curriculum before." "Before what?" Kelthane interrupted. "Before we acknowledge that we've fundamentally misunderstood one of the most fascinating species in known space?" His eyes gleamed with the kind of academic fervor that had made his career. "Miss McKnight, would you be willing to participate in a proper research study?" "Depends on what you want me to do," Zara said cautiously. Kelthane gestured weakly toward a standard Krillian study tablet lying on the nearby equipment cart. The device was legendary for its durability, constructed from compressed molecular matrices that could survive direct plasma hits. "Could you perhaps demonstrate your grip strength on that tablet?" "For purely scientific purposes, of course." Zara picked up the tablet and examined it curiously. "This is the unbreakable one, right? The one you guys use for field research in combat zones?" "Theoretically unbreakable, yes." "Ha." Zara positioned her thumb against the tablet's surface. "Okay, but if this breaks, I'm not paying for it." The crack was sharp and immediate. The molecular matrix that had withstood 2 decades of military testing split cleanly down the middle, but its internal components spilling onto the floor in a shower of crystalline fragments. "Oops," Zara said, looking at the 2 halves in her hands. "Maybe I should have warned you about my fidgeting habits." Kelthane stared at the destroyed tablet with something approaching religious revelation. "Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary." "Professor?" Dean Quellan asked nervously. "I need to submit a new research proposal immediately," Kelthane said, his voice vibrating with academic excitement. Working title, Deathworld Adaptations, Why Humans Are Accidentally Terrifying and How They've Been Politely Not Mentioning It. Zara grinned. "Can I co-author? I've got some great stories about gym class." Zara packed her belongings with the casual efficiency of someone whose day had gone exactly as expected. Notebooks, pens, nail file, and the remains of what used to be an unbreakable tablet all disappeared into her bag with practiced ease. "Well," she said, slinging the bag over her shoulder, "this was fun. Same time next week, Prof?" Kelthane nodded weakly from his gurney, still processing the implications of everything he'd witnessed. "Great," Zara continued cheerfully. "I'll bring my little sister next time. She's visiting from Earth for the semester break." She paused at the auditorium door, turning back with an innocent smile. "Fair warning, though, she's the strong one in the family. Competed in the Galactic Heavy Lifting Championships last year. Took 3rd place while operating at 5% capacity, because the equipment couldn't handle Earth normal settings." The color drained from every face in the auditorium. Even the medical equipment seemed to flicker in distress. "See you next week," Zara called out, waving goodbye as she headed toward her next class. Kelthane watched her leave, his reconstructed hand trembling slightly as the full horror of his situation crystallized. Not only had he been wrong about humans, but this one, This casually terrifying example of Deathworld evolution was apparently the weak one in her family. He looked out at his remaining students, their faces a mixture of terror and fascination, and managed a shaky smile. "And that, class," he said with hard-won wisdom, "is why we never challenge a Deathworlder to arm wrestling even accidentally." The lesson plan for next week would definitely need some revisions, assuming he survived meeting the sister.